Good afternoon, everyone. We will be just a few minutes and starting the session very soon. Thank you.
Test, test. Can you hear me? Good, good. Inka, you might need a set of headphones. So everyone, welcome to this very niche event, as you can see. The event is on the integration of the Rio Conventions with a focus on food systems and agriculture in particular. We have 3 of our speakers here in person, and a couple are also joining us online. Thank you very much for coming to this event. I know that it's been a heavy day, and we'll try to make it as interesting of an experience as possible. I understand that everyone needs to wear a headset, and there are assistants in case you have any technical difficulties with your system. We will have a couple of questions with our speakers, and then I'm really going to give you guys on the floor a chance to ask all the questions you have. So today I am joined by Jessica Troni from UNEP and Tristan Tyrrell from the Convention on Biodiversity, and Inkar from FAO, and a couple of experts also on online who are joining us remotely. One of them is Ioannis from the World Bank, and the other one is Cargele Masso from CGIAR. So as you see, we've tried to encapsulate as much of a broad expertise as possible. These organizations all have different footprints on the field and globally as well, and a solid track record in terms of working on biodiversity conservation, land preservation as well, and tackling the challenges posed by climate change. Before we start, I just wanted to open the floor with a question to the audience this time. I just wanted to see whether our speakers know, or whether anyone from the audience knows, how many trees are cut down every year to allow for agricultural produce globally. And you can throw in wild guesses or estimates. I have the answer, kindly provided by Google, but I want to see if anyone has a rough idea. And experts, you're welcome to throw in your guess as well. So how many trees are cut down each year to allow for agricultural production?
Millions, but I don't know.
So Inkar is saying millions. Anyone from the audience? All Googling away. Cheaters. I cannot believe this. Tristan, how many trees each year?
Individual trees?
Trees, yes. Or wait, let me just check if I have, because I remember it's hectares. So my answer is hectares. I've given you a pointer. Oh wow, Tristan has some serious math game going on. Oh, sorry, Tristan, no one can hear you except for me.
That's okay. I wasn't saying anything overly intelligent anyway. I mean, if it's whatever it's supposed to be 3 football fields worth per minute or something, then scaling that up. So I don't know, 1 million hectares, I suppose.
Okay, 1 million. Anyone saying more than 1 million? 1 million two, 1 million Fabio? Any guess? Okay. So it's 10 million hectares per year. And I think that number really gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of what we are sacrificing to continue on our current trajectory. That being said, I would like to start with our first speaker of the day, Jessica Troni, Head of Adaptation Unit and the Adaptation Portfolio Manager for UNEP. Jessica, I've had you in many of my events, actually, and it's always a pleasure and it's always a learning curve for me. But I think the audience here would also benefit to know a little bit more about the work that UNEP is doing at the intersection of, preserving biodiversity, preserving land, and tackling climate change. So over to you, Jessica. I will hand over the mic and it's on. Yes.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me on, Julia. It's a pleasure to be here. So I work for United Nations Environment Programme. We're an intergovernmental organisation established in 1972. We have a normative mandate. That is to say that we were established to keep the environment under review. And to do that, we initiate assessments. We have governing authority. We have universal membership of 193 countries, an environment assembly that comes together every 2 years. And we also, on the adaptation side, we're an implementing partner or an accredited entity that is able to access international climate change funding to help our member states. So I head up the adaptation unit at UNEP, and I'm just here to give you a few messages. The title of the session is Integration Between the Rio Conventions. And in fact, when you have a look at the Rio Conventions, the Convention on Biological Diversity, climate change, of course, and then land degradation, ecosystem-based approaches, nature-based solutions are woven through those MEAs. Within the Convention of Biological Diversity, you've got the MBSAPs, of course. You may know that acronym. Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans. Within the Convention to Combat Land Degradation, you've got land neutrality targets. And so there is a commonality between the three MEAs. It's not that we're short on planning, put it that way, but what we are short on is implementation, and there are some very significant barriers. Let me just start off by saying, though, that climate change is a huge problem, but it becomes even bigger when you consider that ecosystems are degraded, and so it makes the impacts larger. Just this week or last week, UNEP issued a report on midterm progress report on SDG 6, which is around water management and access for all, and it shows that half of the countries globally have degraded freshwater systems. That means rivers, lakes, and what that means is that it's going to impact on freshwater resources, it's going to impact on health. I mean, I was in Pakistan last year in the Sindh province, which is the lower riparian state, and people are really having a hard time there. They simply don't have fresh water to drink. So when you combine that, and there are a multitude of reasons for why Sindh province doesn't have water, but when you combine that with drier conditions that climate change is bringing, and then occasionally very big floods, then you've got disasters happening. So that's my first key message, is that climate change on top of degraded ecosystems makes the problem much worse. The second message that I want to give is the importance of the enabling environment. And I'm going to pick up here really on agricultural subsidies. Agricultural subsidies in 2023 amounted to $254 billion. But then when you look at the budgets of agricultural ministries, they are a fraction of that. And so this is all data in the State of Finance for Nature report that UNEP published in 2023. And so you can imagine a situation where if you removed the subsidies off the bads, like inorganic fertilizer that actually burns soils, and put them on goods, on technologies and training for smallholder farmers on climate resilient methods, then we could really start to shift the needle. We did a study in the Gambia as part of a large-scale EBA project funded by the Green Climate Fund, and we asked the question about what would make an effective mainstreaming strategy in the Gambia for ecosystem-based adaptation. And it was a really interesting study that came up with things like, well, for farmers, for smallholder farmers, it simply doesn't make economic sense to pursue climate resilient agriculture because inorganic fertilizer is subsidized, because conservation agriculture in the way that it's being practiced increases labor costs, and and so the short-term gains from carrying on doing what they're doing and how they're doing it obviously outweigh the long-term sustainability benefits. So there is a very big role for government, and governments have the power to change that through enabling policies. And then finally to say that I think that on the public finance side we can do a lot better than we're doing just simply by coordinating. Coming back to these Rio Conventions, there was a study done in Rwanda where to reach the 3 targets for the Rio Conventions in Rwanda had a price tag of something like $300 million per year. And if the 3 sets of actions from those Rio Conventions were coordinated and targeted, in an appropriate way, savings could be made something to the tune of $50 million a year. So I think that we can do a lot more by just doing what we're doing in a more coordinated, targeted way. And I think that the UN resident coordinator system at the country level can do a lot to help that coordination off, and I certainly hope that it does. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So enabling policies, removing harmful subsidies, and increasing public finance, but also coordination especially would be key. I think these are some of the main takeaways, and thank you very much. And now I would like to give the mic to Tristan Tyrrell, Program Officer for the Tristan, can you tell us a little bit more about the work that your organization is doing? Clearly, you have a mandate on biodiversity conservation, but how does this apply to food systems and preserving land from degradation?
Thanks very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Yes, indeed. So I come from the Secretariat Convention on Biological Diversity, and about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted. This is the new sort of overarching strategic plan to help us get on track to putting, for us to live in harmony with nature, recognizing that biodiversity loss is at an increasingly worsening trajectory. And our actions to date have been ineffective in terms of turning that around. At the same time, we're seeing the increasing impacts of climate change, increasing desertification and drought, and of course then more broadly we're seeing increasing economic disparities and various other things. And so within the CBD, parties are now required to update their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, their NBSAPs, but in a whole of society, whole of government approach, and recognizing that this isn't just for the small biodiversity office within the Ministry of Environment, or maybe even not even within the Ministry of Environment, but actually in a separate ministry that has very limited political power at the national level. But what we're also seeing at the same time is that areas where people working very much at the local level, and in particular recognizing indigenous peoples and local communities, the abilities that they have through their own practices to effectively conserve the biodiversity they have, to help them to build that resilience to climate change and to other impacts, has been demonstrated, and it's something we need to learn from. And so when it comes to food security and sort of agricultural ecosystems, we need to recognize that we are fundamentally dependent on biodiversity in various guises, and not least for our own food security and ultimately our own health and well-being. And it's that localization of some of these issues and recognizing that we don't necessarily always have technological or technical fixes to issues that we can just rely on if, for instance, we lose certain species or what have you. And I'm thinking in particular relating to pollinators and what would replace pollinators if they go extinct. And so we need to recognize the complexity within these systems, that we can't have sort of singular siloed approaches to this, but we need to be working across sectors, across mandates, and in collaboration with various agencies and experts and expertise at all levels. And so within the CBD, there's obviously a push now to revise those NBSAPs, but to think about, well, how are they linking to the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, and the national adaptation plans within this process, land degradation neutrality targets, the updated targets under UNCCD. How are they linking to various sustainable development strategies and plans across all the different sectors? And part of that is recognizing the benefits of genetic diversity, as well as more broadly of looking at sort of watershed management or what have you at a more broad scale, but also thinking about what sort of species are we cultivating, what sort of livestock are we raising and using, and how are they appropriate for the changing climate and changing circumstances that we are seeing ourselves. So one of the roles within the Secretariat, within the convention generally, is about trying to bring that expertise together and try and reach across some of these siloed divides, looking at it from a systemic perspective and not just staying within our silo, because frankly, after 30 years that the convention has existed, we're seeing increasingly worse trends. We're not turning things around in the way that we should be. And so we need to be thinking about this differently. We need to be taking more novel, more innovative approaches. And of course, that links to some of these questions about resource mobilization, the finance. And so there's issues around the new quantified goal here, the loss and damage fund, and just transition, and various issues that are being addressed under this process. But then how do they link through to some of the new and sort of more sort of progressing issues under the CBD, for instance, including this newly developed Cali fund relating to digital sequence information from and how we're ultimately benefiting from that diversity, that biodiversity that frankly we're all dependent upon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tristan. And indeed, today was the day of number drops, and I was looking up at some stats on biodiversity as well. And one of the ones that hit me the most was really that in the last 30 years, we've lost like 70% of our global biodiversity levels, which is scary. And also in terms of other number drop, how many pollinators are required if you want to produce just like an apple, for example, and it's over 100 to maintain that natural cycle and enable us to have one apple. So it really got my mind going. So thank you for that, and the importance of innovative approaches, but also localizing responses and really enabling local communities to preserve and conserve their biodiversity assets. So thank you very much, Tristan. And now over to Inkar. Inkar, you are currently a senior management officer for natural resources at FAO. We know that FAO has a clear mandate on agriculture specifically. So how are you working on biodiversity and land preservation aspects as well?
Thank you for the question, and good afternoon, everyone. So I work in the office of FAO Office for Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment. And this year we had one of the governing body sessions. The governing body's title is the Committee for Agriculture. And then we had the mandate to prepare by the session of this committee a paper on the interlinkages between the food security, biodiversity and climate change. And that was actually the first time when our office got this mandate, and it was also the first time for FAO to look at the intersection of these three action areas in a more careful way. And then when we did the analysis, we actually realized that we already do quite a lot. We have the two dedicated strategies, strategy on climate change, strategy on biodiversity mainstreaming, both of which have the action plan. We have the strategy, the policy on gender, the policy on indigenous peoples and tribal peoples. We have also the policy on science and innovation. So there's a lot of internal strategy setting, policy definition has already been done around this nexus. But then nevertheless, all of this is still not enough, because the nexus is not that well understood and well researched. And of course, in parallel to that, there is a global process, and this year is a unique year of 3 MEAs. And we've seen that in the recent past, the agriculture and the food systems they got slowly to the mainstream of the agendas under the three MEAs. However, we still believe that a lot more needs to be done in order to fully understand what are those integrated policy measures that can indeed deliver tangible outcomes across these three action areas and across the three MEAs, and specifically in the field of agriculture and food systems. And then while doing this preparatory work for our internal committee session, we realized that there are already existing solutions such as agroecology, for example. And I was also, like you're talking about the numbers, and I thought like, oh, I've done also the same homework, but slightly on like different set of numbers. So just to share with you a bit of statistics and impress everyone. So the agrobiodiversity approaches, for example, they have the potential to improve the food security for 1.3 billion people. They have the potential to increase the soil nitrogen for crops by 46%, decrease the soil erosion by 50%, contribute to soil carbon storage by 21%, and also boost the ecosystem services. So this is just one example of the solution that can deliver across the mandates of three MEAs and have the significant tangible benefit for the environment, but then also for the rural communities and farmers more specifically. But then, while doing again this assessment, we also thought that it's definitely something, but it's at the same time not sufficient in order to really achieve the scalable change, measurable scale change that would also be tangible and could reach out to the ground level and be like feelable changes for the farmers. And we think that we have to continue advocating for the integrated policies and planning measures. And I think currently we're we have this opportune momentum where parties are working on the NDCs. They also have the mandate to complete their work on NBSUBs and LDN. So I think it's a very unique opportunity in time when those planning measures are being done at the national level. However, we also understand that many governments are working in a compartmentalized way, and there are still significant silos, and we have to further encourage the cross-sectoral coordination and planning and set the institutional measures that would facilitate the coordination. We also were thinking that a lot more needs to be done for the effective resource planning at all levels, at the domestic levels, but also internationally. We have to encourage the existing vertical climate funds and the multilateral development banks to encourage and finance those measures which have scalable and measurable cross-sectoral benefits. And I think they have to set the clear priorities for integrated solutions and holistic solutions that can contribute to the implementation of the commitments of the MEAs. But then at the same time, I think also that the three convention secretariats should also make an effort to see where the synergies could be built and what are the potential trade-offs and how to set the priorities in such a way that the countries don't have an increased burden, for example, for policy planning, reporting and coordination. Many developing countries already complain that the current MEA's agendas are growing, the commitments are also expanding. So I think a lot more needs to be done also at the global level in order to streamline those processes. And maybe the last point is around the data, the knowledge management, and also the building of capacity. I think maybe I will start from the point on data. Currently, the data monitoring and measurement systems are very fragmented. They're fragmented at the national level, but they're also fragmented at the international level. And we have seen a lot the situations when the data is not compatible, the data is not collected at the regular level, the data is not disaggregated either by sex or by, for example, ability level or by geographic level, the data is not sufficiently granulated. And then again, as an international community or as UN agencies, we encourage governments to work on the better data collection. But I think also, along with this responsibility on the governments, we should also offer them some capacity building and assistance in the form of the data management tools or the methodologies, or even support with the capacity building for collection of disaggregated data. And these were the points that we discussed with our committee members in FAO about a month ago. And I'm happy to hear that many of those points, they resonate well with the conversations that we hear now at this COP. And definitely, I think we also heard similar messages coming from COP16. And I believe that conversation would probably be also quite similar to this at the coming COP under the CCD.
Thank you so much, Inkar. So I appreciate the focus, especially on the capacity building. So yes, we need data, but we need to enable governments and countries to have access to that data and be able to make the best use of it as well. So I would like to go now to one of our online speakers. I see on screen Kagele Mastro. He is the director of the Platform on Environmental Health and Biodiversity for CGIAR. Kagele, it's very nice to have you here today.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, the way the screen is positioned, you are behind me, so but I can see you, and the room can see you as well. So, Kagele, we know about the very big efforts put in place by CGIAR in the area of biodiversity preservation, but can you tell us a little bit more and maybe give us a couple of examples of the work that you're doing across food systems and biodiversity preservation and land preservation there as well? So over to you.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everyone in Baku and colleagues. I'm talking to you from Nairobi, and I assume you can hear me. Yeah, so if you can hear me, it's a really good point you are making here, and I think colleagues from UNFCCD and FAO have done an excellent introduction of the topic and the issue. Now, going back really to the work we are doing at CGIAR, I will start from where the FAO started with the really agrobiodiversity, which is very, very critical. Our colleague mentioned some of the beauty of it, but one of key aspects also to mention is its critical importance in terms of integrating the three Rio Conventions. If we have to have systems, food systems which are resilient to climate change and so on, we need a diversity of really crops, of livestock, and any other kind of animals that we need in the food system. And it's clearly to understand, because with climate change, despite the efforts that we are doing, it's variable. So something can still happen. So we need to make sure that the system is resilient. So if you have one species that is more affected than the others, you can get something saved. I can give you the example of the Corn of Africa, where with the recent drought, before the El Nino, because we got a lot of rains these days, but before then it was severe droughts for more than 3 years. And most of the cattle, livestock in terms of cattle and so on, were mostly decimated. But in terms of the camels, some of them survived, which shows the real need of the diversity. The same thing can apply to crop. The reason that we developed the varieties which are drought resilient, which are heat resilient, is also another really opportunity to broaden our gene bank in terms of the possibilities. So one of the things when we talk about capacity building, data needs and so on, really the most critical point is to make sure that we set up clear indicators that we use to monitor how things are moving. If we talk about conservation of genetic resources, how many efforts we are doing as the stakeholders at country levels, at local levels, in terms of increasing the conservation units or the genetic resources. If you ask me what I used to see in the field, a few years ago, maybe let's say 30 decades to date, most of them have disappeared in the field. Who has been able to save those seed varieties, crop varieties? Not sure. We may have a few, but some of it has been lost. You refer to 70% of losses. And if we don't take the actions, it will be even worse. How do we make sure that the little we have, we can be able to save it? And when we talk about genetic resource sharing and sustainable use, what we have been able to save in the gene banks, how do we make sure that we work with the countries, we work with the different stakeholders so that it could be retested, re-evaluated in the field, and also do a bit of crop improvement to be able to adapt. So we have been really working with the strategic partners. CGIAR works in collaboration. We can't achieve impact unless we work closely with the countries, with the different stakeholders. So we have been working in terms of really building the capacity for gene bank at the high level, but also community-based seed systems. We have two initiatives that we refer to agroecology. Most of you have reported the critical need for agroecology. We have also an initiative on nature positive, where we really test solutions related to agrobiodiversity and increasing really conservation at the grassroots, but also making sure that we duplicate some of the material in some of our gene banks. There is a room still for investment, especially really in terms of improving our in situ conservation and so on. And more importantly, and I will pause here, is really what can we do to make sure that there is a system in place that allows to monitor the performance of our actions over time, to be able to understand where we are heading in the right direction and where we need to adjust. The critical need of a bank of indicators. We have developed some of at CGIAR, but we really still need to work closely with the different partners so that we can be able to harmonize and to have a system that could be applied at different scales. And I will pause here. I'll come back later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kakele. And I take away the importance of gene banks, but also of local seed banks as well, and indicators to monitor how adaptable and flexible to adjustments we are in the coming years. I would like to give the floor to another online speaker, Ioannis from the World Bank. Ioannis is a senior agricultural specialist.
Hello.
Ioannis,
can you hear me?
Yes, yes, now we can hear you. So, Ioannis, you have been with me on many of the panels I've organized, so I know very well the great job that the World Bank is doing in the different sectors. But for the benefit of our very niche audience here today, if you would like to give us some pointers in terms of some of the main initiatives that you have this year and the next that you would like us to be aware of. So over to you.
Thanks so much, Julia, and thanks for inviting us to be part of this panel. We would like to congratulate the CRFS Alliance. As you mentioned, you have been working on some of the niche areas, and I definitely think that putting together the three conventions, it's a niche area and it's a missing gap in the space of while we're accelerating our efforts towards food systems transformation. We work, I think, each one of our organizations, probably in countries, they work individually towards each one of the conventions, but I think there is much less work when it comes to combining the goals and the policy commitments of the three conventions together. So congrats for that. Maybe let me take a step back and let me try to frame how we see the key question here as fit. So at least from the perspective of the World Bank and in agriculture, we put a lot of focus on the following question: how do we ensure food security while halting global warming, but at the same time enhancing the resilience of our food system in a livable planet? And I would like to focus on the last few words of this question, the livable planet. Because I think this, first, it's something new in terms of the strategy of the bank, but also it brings together, I think, some of the context of the other two Rio Conventions besides the Climate Change Convention. Given that, I think there is an increased interest, and we see that both from the client perspective, but also among our partners and within the institution, to put focus on nature. And we see nature as a key to climate mitigation, but also adaptation. Natural-based solutions are especially crucial both for climate resilience, but also they could provide, according to our estimates, about 30%, 37% of the cost-effective mitigation potential in our planet. And of course, there are many examples. Oceans, soils, forests, peatlands are the world's largest carbon sink. And they absorb about 60% of gross annual anthropogenic emissions. So there is huge potential working in this area. Having said that, obviously there is a big gap when it comes to the amount of financing and specifically the amount of climate finance that goes to the ag and food sectors. According to the latest estimates, and there has been a recent report from the bank on that, we call it the recipe for a livable planet, less than 5% of the total climate finance goes to the sector, and this is even less when it comes to mitigation action, which is extremely crucial if we want to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. But there are good news. In the COP in the UAE, the countries, for the first time, they signed, more than 160 countries, they signed a new declaration, the Emirates Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture. And on that, they put together some pledges to integrate agriculture and food security issues in many of the policy commitments, for example, the NDC, the NAPS, the LTS, but also the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So there is the policy commitment and interest there to bring together the three Rio Conventions, and I think our responsibility in terms of implementers and policy-making institutions is to help to work together with partners and our client countries to make that happen in practice and at scale. When it comes to the World Bank, and I guess I'm sure other fellow MDBs, they work in many similar ways. We work across three pillars, which is knowledge, finance, and partnerships. And I think this is very much aligned with the work that the CRFS Alliance is doing. And that's why we are core members of the Alliance. And we keep supporting the work that you do with the very limited resources available. So when it comes to the knowledge, I mentioned some of the examples, the recipe for the livable planet, our most recent analytics, which provides a framework on mitigation action for climate and food. When it comes to financing, in the bank, we have managed to increase our total financing for climate smart agriculture 8 times since the Paris Agreement. And that accounts about 62% of the total financing for the ag and food sector, at least for the last fiscal year. That also represents a 10% increase within a year in terms of the amount of the financing that goes on ag and food and can be classified as climate finance. This is a very significant scale of increase, at least in the space of MDBs. But we work also together with countries. Many of the colleagues, they mentioned the importance of the repurposing work. So we put a lot of focus on that. We currently work with about 40 countries to repurpose agri-food support to make agricultural growth more sustainable. And that comes with multiple benefits that I think they span across the three conventions, both on reducing emissions, building resilience, but also increase and sustain biodiversity and reduce land degradation. We also put a lot of, given the scarcity of resources, we put a lot of focus on financing innovation And just to give you an example, we recently signed a new loan with the government of Uruguay. That's a 350 million new project, and it includes a unique mechanism of reducing the interest payments if the country meets certain targets in terms of methane, in terms of reductions in methane emissions. So there is a lot of, and this is just one of the examples of financial innovation that the World Bank and other MDBs and partners, they have been working on. And we hope that with that, we will manage to increase the total pool of climate financing that goes to the sector, which is very, very important. When it comes to the biodiversity, the bank is currently investing over 4 billion directly in biodiversity projects, and this is a small part of the total envelope on environment, which is about 14 billion US dollars in active projects in all environment sectors. We work together with countries to implement the ambitious targets that they have under the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So that's another area that we have been working together. We also put together recently a natural finance tracking methodology. Is basically an implementation step that comes out of the MDB common principles for tracking natural positive finance. It's something quite similar actually with a similar process that the MDBs they have agreed and they have been working on in terms of tracking the climate finance. So we put a lot of emphasis on aligning the work between the MDBs. I believe 2 days ago, the MDBs also announced in Baku a new common framework for climate metrics. And I think that's the first time that the MDBs, they move together from kind of input tracking methodology on climate finance to an outcome-based methodology on tracking the climate finance flows. And I think we all think that this is going to be a very important step in increasing the outcomes and impacts of how much we spend on climate finance. Maybe just to mention a few more examples. In the bank, we have been developing what we call global challenge programs. These are new areas of action and activities on specifically focusing on cross-cutting areas. So related to the 3 conventions, there are 2 new programs, one on forests for development, climate and biodiversity, and one on food and nutrition security. So within those programs, we hope and we aim to work on niche areas, as you mentioned, and some of those is to seek new forms of funding, such as in the capital and carbon markets. This is absolutely important if we really want to move beyond this stagnation at almost 5% of the climate finance that goes to the sector. But also, it's very important, and we take that very seriously at the World Bank, to make a serious effort to consolidate funding opportunities to better maximize impact. So that's a few examples of the key priority areas that we have been working on. And just to summarize, the importance of innovation, and that comes both with financial innovation, innovation when it comes to knowledge generation. We have been working obviously with many knowledge partners, with FAO, the CGIAR, and others, but also technological innovation and implementation at scale. The second pillar, the importance of working with policy commitments and with clients on that. Colleagues mentioned the revision of the NDCs, but we also see the importance of, I think our colleague from FAO mentioned that working across the related policy commitments and make them more coherent. And finally, the importance of investing at scale. And I mentioned here some shortcuts that we have been working on most recently to ensure that the total financing envelope that goes to the sector increases significantly in the short and medium term. Thank you so much, colleagues, for listening from Benin, where I'm currently based, and over to Baku.
Thank you so much, Ioannis, and thanks for all the examples you provided. And 14 billion, that's actually very impressive, and very happy to hear that that number is up and growing. I would like now to pass the floor to our last speaker. Herwig Ranner is the team leader for climate change and the Directorate General for Agriculture and Rural Development of the European Commission. Herwig, you joined us running after a negotiation session, so thank you so much for squeezing this in. I would like to learn more about the European Commission's efforts with regards to this soft spot, this intersection between climate, land and biodiversity. Are there any initiatives that you would like to flag today or either present and ongoing or that are being launched or looked at in the coming year as well? That would be definitely of interest. So over to you, Herwig.
Thank you. Sorry for being late, but we just finalized the agriculture negotiations and we have a good outcome, so we're all very happy. You can clap. So I have a colleague here who was there as well. So to start with, first and foremost, we have our agriculture policy that is working on all those areas already since a number of years. Because in the measures that we have in the agriculture policy, we address biodiversity, climate, in some cases also desertification, if you want, because we work against land degradation. We have member states where this is an issue. So there's about 30% of the budget that goes into those measures. We have recently started to assess the impact of those measures for climate change, but I'm sure we will then also look at biodiversity and maybe less on land degradation, but maybe that can be done as well. I have to see with colleagues where we are there. Internationally, when we are at the COP, we integrate anything that is linked to nature-based solutions. We have mentions of biodiversity whenever we talk about land. You will find also notions of that in the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work or in the decision that established it. So the EU was always pushing for showing that we try to exploit the synergies of the 3 EU conventions. Now I know that there's a couple of initiatives that have been launched recently to try to integrate the 3 Rio Conventions even more. What we do here at the COP, because we're at COP29, where we can, we will make reference. And we know that for some issues like sustainable land management, working against land degradation, you have positive outcomes also for climate. You need to protect the sink that you have and maybe even increase it if you can. Same goes for sustainable forest management, which links back to that, which also links to biodiversity, because if you have sustainable forest management, then you will also have a high biodiversity. So in a nutshell, that's what we try to do in the different negotiation rooms. So you have one on agriculture, one a whole series on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, where you know that things are not finished yet. There's still a couple of discussions going on. Colleagues of mine sitting very late. Yeah, I think I will stop here. I'm pretty exhausted. I had to collect my thoughts a little bit. We were at it the whole day. What I can tell about our outcome is that we successfully launched this online portal where you can also upload whatever you think makes sense for increasing the synergies between the 3 conventions. It should have a link to agriculture and farmers. And the more you communicate on your topic, also by spreading information on platforms like the one we have, it will help. I know Johannes will look at the platform as soon as there's something on it. And other institutions will do the same. I don't see the colleagues from the FAO here, but they were in the room when we... there's one. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't know you. I work with Marcial and Julia. And take everything back. So there are people from the FAO in the room. And thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Herwig, and thanks even more because we know how stretched you've been with these negotiations, and very happy that they've pulled through. And to learn more about this platform as well, I saw Johannes smiling, but I think ourselves we will also try and visit as soon as possible. So thank you very much for making it to this event. I know that we didn't have the expected turnout in terms of audience. That's a little bit unfortunate because, you know, negotiations are also like concluding, and the time maybe is not optimal. But we do have people in the room, and I would like to give these people the opportunity to ask any questions they may have, or any reflections, or also really take the opportunity to jump on any of our speakers for networking purposes. And I mean this in the best way possible, of course. No physical harm done, please. Especially no harm done to poor Herwig, because he mentioned he is quite exhausted. So others of us are still having energies to tackle unwanted. But I see, Sylvie, you would have a question. I think we only have one mic, so I'm going to have to pass it to you.
Yes, it's a question and solution. And first of all, thank you very much for this very good session and critical one, because we don't. And I'm here speaking from the non-state actor engagement in the Marrakesh Partnership on Adaptation and Resilience, and we had a session this afternoon called the Resilient Planet or Initiative or something like that. And it was mentioned also in terms of the metrics that we don't have these common metrics, we don't have this common language, we're not moving forward together. And that's just adaptation and resilience work on the climate crisis. If we do add in the biodiversity crisis, the land degradation crisis, the water crisis, the resulting hunger crisis, health crisis, and all the rest that we are in, not to mention some of the conflicts, I think there is a need to, and that's the question where I'd like to hear your reflection, this sort of a shared portfolio of solutions, not only the metrics, because I think the metrics, we have a lot of the metrics indicators in the SDGs. And some of these SDGs, you know, we can bring them together, and some of these simple ones make sense already. But focusing on solution, even locally led solution on the various aspects, yes, being context specific and so on. I think if we break out the silo between the naming, the concepts, the technologies, they are much more in common than what we think. And if we have this sort of embracing efforts together, like these events today and many more of what you're doing, maybe you could share some of the reflection or from the knowledge portal, how can that take us to this more shared portfolio of solution that we are trying to shape for climate change adaptation and resilience? We're having some of the embryo, but how can we, you know, expand this to the biodiversity and the land degradation, for example? Maybe you could just give us a few thoughts on this idea of solution, shared solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvie. And I see we have another question. I would like to give the opportunity to our speakers to respond. I'm not sure if any one of you would like to address Sylvie's point. I see Jessica is ready.
So I think there are many shared solutions for sure, but what I would like to bring your attention to is what is outside the shared solutions, because that is really important in terms of how programs are designed and also for the risk of maladaptation. So let me explain. This year I had a very tense situation within UNEP. It was over the design of a Great Green Wall program. And you know, the land degradation focal people look at this in a particular way. But it was super surprising to me when I saw the draft proposal because there was no water in it. I mean, for goodness sakes, we're talking about the driest area on this planet, practically. But it was because their entry point is land degradation. Like biodiversity folks, their entry point is biodiversity. Adaptation is unique in the MEAs in that the entry point is people. So that's the first thing that I want to raise to everyone's attention, is that yes, there's a shared sort of Venn diagram in the middle of what we all agree on, but then there's the outside space which is equally important. The other thing that I would say about maladaptation is that systems analysis is really, really important. And this is particularly aimed at the banks, because it's all very well to say that climate resilient agriculture programs are being developed and so on. But what I would really like banks to start doing is to analyse what the systems analysis is. And infrastructure in agriculture, for example, can often lead to maladaptation. The clearest example of that that I've come across, and I bring Pakistan up again because it is the most degraded ecological system I have seen in my 30 years of experience. It's absolutely shocking what's happened there. In the lower riparian state, Sindh, that hardly receives any of the Indus waters, the soils are dust. And what's caused that, of course, is a massive rice industry upstream, massive drainage systems, massive dikes and bunds. It's the biggest irrigation system in the world, and it's got the biggest drainage system in the world. But Sindh province, which is a huge area with millions of people in it, are really suffering. So when I hear about a bank saying we're lending out money to repair the drainage system or build on the drainage system, to me, there is something very, very wrong with the way that the analysis is being done. So, key point for me, yes, we have a lot of shared commonalities, but what is on the outside of that shared commonality, that's equally as important, because that will lead to heightened vulnerabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Anyone else from our speakers would like to remark on Sylvie's question? Otherwise, I would hand it over to our second question.
Julia, can I jump in?
Oh yes, please.
Sorry, just to complement, our colleague. I think these are all very important issues, and I have been trying to think creatively how we can overcome some of these barriers. And I see there are several levels that we can work on, both from the banking side and the MDB world, but also in terms of the rest of the institutions. One is the policy dialogue. We are all involved in different types of policy dialogue. I'm sure FAO, the bank as well, they hold certain, together with the clients, they're requested to hold certain policy dialogue processes. And I think this is a unique opportunity for us to try to bring the goals of the 3 Rio Conventions together and avoid duplication of efforts and silos that they do exist in this world. So that's one thing. When it comes to program design and project design, definitely this is an issue as well. The MDBs, it's not an exception, and we work in different sectors. But I think there are also important efforts that are being done to consolidate efforts. And one, for example, in the bank, we have been developing over the last few years what we call climate CCDRs, or climate change and development reports. And these are reports that they really bring together both climate goals, adaptation and resilience and mitigation with more traditional development goals. And they're meant to inform the policy process in the countries, but also the creation of bankable projects and future investments. So there are certain efforts, I think, that are being done for many of the partners, but it is also important, and I think it's our responsibility on the implementer side when we design a project to make sure that we anchor it, and not just, for example, to NDCs, but also, the national biodiversity plans, if it is the case. So that's very important because this is really the starting point, at least in the MDB world. When you, how do you frame a project? And, obviously it is quite significant because, they do represent a big part of, the annual investment portfolio in many of our client countries. So if the start is good, I think then the possibility to have impact at scale across the treaty Rio Conventions can materialize. The third area, and I think this is also related with the program design, is the area of metrics. And I mentioned, the common principles on the climate metrics that it was announced in this COP by the MDBs, but definitely there is more effort that needs to be done in that space. This is just the start of, agreeing on a common methodology for climate metrics. But this is also an example of, obviously, how far is the research, is the progress that has been done in the research world, etc., versus the actual implementation. Obviously, there are excellent metrics that they have been developed over the years by many of the partners and FAO, of course. But actually, many of those metrics, they haven't made their presence to the actual investment. And I think this is a huge gap, and this is also a big responsibility for many of us that were involved in this process to include metrics that are inclusive of the goals across the 3 Rio Conventions. Otherwise, we will keep working in silos, as our colleague mentioned. Thank you.
First, thank you for this excellent panel. And I'm Jacqueline from Brazil, from I think tank Choices Institute. It seems that biodiversity is the way to integrate food system into the Rio Convention. So I would like hear from all of you, or what else, how can we do the agenda of agro-biodiversity moves forward if when we talk about food security, for example, commodities and monoculture are have great importance and are considered an answer for food security. So we all know that commodities are a threat for agro-biodiversity. And how can we face this trade-off? And how can we think about a transition?
That's a good question. In the EU, we have started to look at how to integrate agroecological practices. I mean, we're not there yet, but already in the CAP that we have now, you have those in. It's also a choice of the farmer to go further than the minimum that we ask for when we have our measures that are supported by taxpayers' money as part of the CAP. Some go already further, but all is linked also to what the market asks for, and the market asks for things that you as clients or customers ask for. What you want to buy in the supermarket will determine what farmers all over will produce. So it's a multifaceted issue. I can just say in the EU for food systems transformation, or how do we look at the food system, we still need to do a little bit of homework. We have the farm to fork strategy that is not entirely implemented yet, but we are working on it. So there you have an angle that is, all the middleman between the farmer and the public, where you need to take a good look at what can you do there to reduce emissions, but also how to ensure that this infrastructure is also resilient enough for the climate changes that will come. So there's not a question of if, but there will be further changes that we need to face. Secondly, how to incentivize farmers to work differently. At the end of the day, they are also businessmen. They need to live from what they do, so we need to ensure that they have a viable market and that they are compensated for efforts where they might lose money. So this is also part of it. And then how do you inform the public better so that they might look at how they could change consumption, but you cannot force them, so you also need to inform and incentivize. So there's not one solution for this problem there. In monocultures, yeah, it's the easiest way to for big staple crops. You have a big tractor and the corresponding rest of the machinery. It's cheaper than if you have 10 small fields that are all over the place and you need to go there one at a time with a small tractor, and you have more costs for fuel and etc. etc. So that's why we had the development of these big monocultures. So if we don't want them, then we also together need to look at what each of us can do to change the system.
Before I turn to FAO, because this is your bag completely, but I had a conversation just today with a lady from an American NGO called Save the Soil. Fascinating discussion I had with her. But she brought up an example of a farmer that has 4,000 or 6,000 acres in the US that turned his farm, he's a commercial farmer, turned his farm over to regenerative farming and made more money because he needs less inputs. So, and I know that there are examples like this in Kenya as well, commercial farmers in Kenya. So I think really what we need to do is we need to collect these examples and publish them, because it is possible to do the right thing for nature, for soils, and to make money from it. So that is something that I'm going to do following this COP. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jessica, Inker, did you want to add to that?
Just maybe one idea. I think that it would be important to analyze the market of that particular commodity, whichever commodity we look at, and do a very careful the value chain analysis to see where the optimizations could be made and where the efficiency could be gained. Maybe we have to look at the inputs, at the energy use, and remove those elements of the chain where there is so-called economic leakage, and that could be also one of the strategies. But then eventually or essentially this exercise is needed to demonstrate to the farmers that there are ways where the food could be produced in a way that with the optimized delivery on the production, on the use of the systems, on the use of the resources, and also with much lesser carbon footprint.
Thank you so much, Inka. And I really like what Jessica said. It is possible to make money out of it and make the right decision at the same time. So I think this is a key takeaway message from this session. I'm just looking at the audience to see if anyone has any further questions before we wrap up. You have these wonderful experts lined up, so please feel free to make the most if you have any question on integration and sorry. Oh, sorry, there's a question online. How do I see the question?
Kelly, if you'd like to speak.
It's not a question. It was just to contribute to the comment about agrobiodiversity versus commodities and monoculture. And I think colleagues have addressed it very nicely. I think it will take us to go in really investing further, something that we have started at CGIAR, but we still have some work to do, and I think others are also working on it, trying to understand the true cost of food production. Because the conventional farming, really, if we think about the repurposing some harmful subsidies, could be also not as competitive as even agrobiodiversity or agroecology. These are some of the options that we need to keep in mind. Payment for ecosystem services, probably as the colleague from EU Commission said, I think the payment for ecosystem services will be very, very great as we think about regenerative agriculture, we think about agroecology, we think about agrobiodiversity. And I like the point of really the colleague from UNEP in terms of making it clear that it's not because we shift to agrobiodiversity or agroecology that we are not going to meet the food security need. What we need is to really to go back and study enough about the UN Sustainable Development Goal 12, about responsible consumption and production. We have a lot of food waste in the current conventional farming systems, which I do believe if we are able to reduce this food waste, we can be able to meet some of our food needs by going regenerative agriculture, by going agroecology, by going, let's say, agrobiodiversity. But really the understanding of the market dynamics, understanding the policy coherence and so are some of the areas which we are invited probably to invest further. And as the colleague from UNEP said, making sure that most of those really good cases, case studies are brought to the attention of really the whole of society, then we can be able to make the shift. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Kakele. And I mean, if I may add from my side, it's also really educating consumers towards a behavioral shift and educating them in terms of what they are purchasing for their own welfare and the planet's welfare as well, right? So this year, I think cow milk in Germany was sold at around 90 cents a liter, and oat milk was sent at around €2, no? So immediately you see there is a little bit of a trade-off between the price levels, but then what really are you purchasing? You know, what is the cost of that cow milk versus the oat milk? So I think that's really a mindset shift that's needed as well. So at this point, since there are no further questions, I would really like to thank all the speakers, both online, Kagele and Ioannis, but also the speakers here with me, Inkar and Jessica and Tristan and Herwig. It's been a pleasure to have you. I think we've made the most of this little opportunity that we had, and thank you so much to the audience for joining us, especially these two ladies that have been with us throughout the entire event. It was really nice to have you, and thanks to the organizers and to my staff support, Fabio, as well. So thank you very much, and I wish you a lovely proceeding of the evening.